labs, the science practicals have become more of a routine activity that needs to be done rather than for the pure joy of learning. Can we develop a curriculum where we, instead of having the usual unit tests, quizzes, okay, they're important, reward for class participation and reward for developing prototypes, developing new stuff. You can always say that, okay, in medical education, you don't need maths. Fine, you may not need maths to qualify that examination or study medicine, but you will not be able to not be a good doctor in so far as diagnosis is concerned because your pattern recognition and problem solving skills are not that great. I'll be speaking today on strengthening research and risk taking in higher education. But I want to begin by saying that this is not only a higher education issue. It begins much earlier in how we teach our children to ask questions, how we allow students to make mistakes, and how do we recognize teachers who help students move from curiosity to action. A brief background of where we stand. India is now ranked 38th amongst 139 economies in the Global Innovation Index 2025, and we're the first amongst the lower middle income economies. So the moot question is not whether India has innovative capacity or not. The question that we rather collectively as educators and academics should ponder is whether our campuses convert that capacity into regular practice. So my central argument will be very simple that innovation culture is not built by capital. It is built by permissions, practices, partnerships, and incentives. Let me begin with the question that's there on the slide. When was the last time a student in an institution was rewarded for asking a good question rather than giving the correct answer, right? And this is not a soft question. It goes to the heart of research and innovation culture. And if you look at our daily work, most of our institutions are very good at rewarding correct answers, syllabus completion, marks, attendance, and compliance. So these are necessary, and I'm not discounting the impact of all these activities that we do day in and day out. But research begins with doubt, and innovation begins with discomfort. And entrepreneurship essentially begins with someone saying, why should this problem be solved in this old way? That's how all the startups that you hear of have emerged and have done well. So if you can talk of, say, for example, Blinkit or a Jepto, which solved the problem convenience. Right? I needed a grocery or I need something urgently, and I do not have the wherewithal or means to go to an outlet, work through the assortment of products available, and this is the problem that needed to be solved. And this is a problem that was solved by Blinkit and Jepto, and the consumers have embraced them, right? And that this sort of logic will hold true for any startup that has succeeded in this country or elsewhere for that matter. So when a student asks a question that interrupts the lesson, we as educators, what do? Do we treat it as an indiscipline or as curiosity? Or when a student submits an imperfect prototype, we all have the science exhibitions in our school. We, of course, celebrate the ones who do great projects. Did not matter. I mean, if it has been done by the parents or if they have taken external help, but uh, if it looks good to us, we reward that. We reward that and we praise that sort of work. But do we praise an imperfect prototype or do we mark it down because we deem it as unfinished? Or do we ask what was learned? Okay, it's an imperfect prototype, but did the student learn anything? Right? And this is where the lesson begins. When a student fails after trying something original, do we record only the failure or do we record the learning? If you look at all our metrics and all our evaluation systems, they are designed to measure successes and individual level contribution. nowhere have we devised an ecosystem which measures the learning. And this is more endemic at a school and at a junior college level. So by the time we start looking at the learning aspects in the undergraduate or postgraduate or even at advanced levels, is already very late, right? So that's why I say that research and innovation culture is a behavioral system. It is created by what we reward, what we tolerate, and what we model. So let me begin by laying out the four levers through which such a culture can be built, because it's easier to say, it's very easy to say that we need a culture that rewards learning and questioning and pattern recognition, problem solving. They're all fancy words, great to have, but how to do that? So, moving on to the next slide, innovation culture is built through four levers, and those levers are permissions. What are students and teachers allowed to try? Can they work on local problems? Can they question an existing method? Can faculty spend time mentoring a student team without being told that this is outside the purview of responsibility or workload? Now, these are some important questions that need to be asked. Do we have an institutional mechanism which rewards faculty members or students who are working on such kind of initiatives? I leave it to you. The second lever is practices. Innovation culture cannot be created by a poster saying that, think creatively. It has to enter classroom practice, lab practice, assessment practice, and project practice. This is something that we do extensively in a business school, because business school is a very short duration. Business program is a very short duration program. You do not really have much of a time to ingrain students into the world of practice. And the world of practice uh, doesn't really look at what kind of frameworks or what kind of knowledge they have. What they actually want to evaluate is how to apply that knowledge. Now, in terms of imparting the necessary learning or the lessons or the frameworks or the methods or the formulas, we are great. We're really great. Our textbooks are good, and we have sort of devised a system which essentially ensures that this happens. Now, whether students are able to apply that knowledge in real world, that's something that needs to be embedded into practices. That's what my second lever talks about. The third level is partnerships. Now, no institution, more so with the research constrained institutions, can build the entire innovation ecosystem alone. So what do they do? So they must connect with the state startup missions, the incubators, the alumni who might have done well in the particular field, the industry mentors, the government schemes also come into play, and also the other institutions of excellence who may have those resources. For example, if you're based out of, say, Kerala, the Kerala Startup Mission and the Indian Institute of Management Code have a very nice ecosystem. I'll talk about it in the later part of my presentation. So, can the schools connect with these institutions and figure out a way to deal with the uh, second lever, right? How to create an innovation culture. The fourth lever is incentives. If a teacher is mentoring student ventures, is supporting patents, is building industry linkages, or is helping students validate ideas, does that count in the annual appraisal? Do we make it count? Do we actually value those teachers who are into all these activities, or we see that as a additional work that they're doing purely out of their own interest? If we are not devising an institutional mechanism to incentivize those teachers and mentors, then innovation will continue to remain a voluntary labor. And then what will happen is we might invest the necessary capital to build the infrastructure, or the government might keep on announcing great policies to embed the innovation into the learning and the educational programs, but culture of innovation won't be built. because the culture is taught, and the teachers and the mentors play a very pivotal role in that. So now let us start with the most common mistakes that the institutions make, right? And so we can go to the next slide. So many institutions think that innovation begins by buying equipment, opening a lab, launching an innovation sale, or holding one annual event. This may help, but they are not enough. So Atal Tinkering Labs, for example, is a very pertinent instance of this particular piece that I'm talking about. India has about 10,000 Atal Tinkering Labs across 35 states and union territories. We the labs claim to have engaged over 1.1 crore students with more than 16 lakh innovation projects created. That's a very large infrastructure base. But the real lesson here is not the number of labs. The real lesson is that the same lab can become very different things in different schools. In one school, it becomes a locked room. In another, it might become the most vibrant and active space on campus. And I would say the difference is not because of the equipment or the resources that are there. If that would have been the case, all our entrepreneurs would have come from the elite institutions of the country. That's not the case. Some of our most interesting innovations have come from the most resource constrained states of the country or most resource constrained institutions uh, of the country, right? So the difference, I would say, is not in terms of resources or what equipments you put in or what is the kind of capital you give to the students to work around. I'm not saying that they're not important. That obviously they're very important. The difference, I would say, is the ownership of the teachers, the support of the administration, notably the principals, and the kind of freedom you give to your students and how the institute treats experimentation. So I would say the lab matters, but the teacher who activates the lab matters more. So the pivotal role has to be played in this piece is by the teachers. Otherwise, it's just a set of glass buildings and a lot of infra with students coming in, going out, passing examinations. All that is happening. A lot of activities, but no outcome. For schools, a cultural practice may be a question wall, a weekly problem solving hour, or a science fair where students are rewarded for method rather than polish. For colleges, it may be undergraduate research, student consulting projects, journal clubs, or brown bag seminars that we do that happens in some of the top institutions of the country where people are free to just go and discuss their ideas and debate and see if it really has the meat to succeed in the marketplace, right? Of faculties discussing their work in progress, either in a formal or an informal setup. But institutions do not have to do this alone. India has created a lot of scaffolding. The issue is whether we plug onto it. Now, I would argue that the Indian scaffolding, the Indian institutional scaffolding already exists. We can move to the next slide. We'll talk more about the Indian innovation scaffolding. What is it that the country we have already in the system? It's already embedded in the system. A resource constrained institution should not begin by saying that we do not have an IIT level lab, right? I've heard this so often that we do not. So it's the IITs, the Indian Institute of Science, the top NITs, the BITS Pilani, the likes of this kind of institutions. They are, or the when we talk about schools, the ones elite schools run by industrialists or the international schools, they have all the infrastructure. We do not have that kind of infrastructure, so we cannot innovate. Now that's a wrong starting point. So the Indian innovation scaffolding already exists on multiple levels and they are absolutely non-discriminatory. They will not discriminate between a institution of eminence or institution of repute or a top school versus a slightly smaller school which is located in some small part of the country. For schools, there are adult tinkering labs and related school innovation programs. For colleges, the Ministry of Education's Innovation Cell and Institution Innovation Councils are meant to systematically foster innovation culture. State startup missions, I gave the example of Kerala startup mission and Each state has a startup mission. Some are more, vibrant than others, but nonetheless, they're there for a reason, and it is up to us how do we leverage them. And they can always provide access to mentors, founders, ecosystem events, grants, and incubator networks. And there are informal networks also, like in Ahmedabad, you have a network called e-Chai network. The gentleman who has been instrumental in running that network, I happen to know him, and uh, the kind of work he does, that has even fascinated the university in the US, and he has gone and given talks at University of California, Berkeley, which is one of the hub of some of the top startups that have been founded right in the Bay Area. So at the top of the pyramid, of course, you have institutions of eminence that represent the elite version of the same principle: autonomy, research orientation, and institutional ambition. But the deeper message is not that every institution must become an institution of eminence. Of course, that is a worthy goal to pursue, but it'll take time. But what every institution can certainly do is create its own smaller version of an innovation ecosystem by connecting outward. So this is why I would ask every principal or a director to do one exercise. So many of you in the audience, you are already in the administration or in a leadership position in your respective institution. So map what institution is already eligible for. Which are those government schemes that you are eligible for? Which are the nearby incubators? Who are some of your alumni who are part of this startup ecosystem and are doing well or are in a position to advise? Who are the industry partners who are the probable industry partners who can help you out in terms of giving access to certain resources or ecosystems which you would not have in your institution? Whether teachers or faculty are adequately trained to lead this kind of an ecosystem. Yes, there are faculty development programs or quality improvement programs that run across institutions, including at SPJN. And can your faculty leverage that, or can you sponsor a faculty to go and be trained? There's no harm in learning and training yourself to take up new responsibilities. Are there some student competitions where students can participate, and doesn't matter whether they win that or not? A lot of our folk energies and resources are focused on winning competitions, and in the process, the joy of learning is lost. My point is that if you, by virtue of just participating in this kind of student competition, the students will start to learn a lot, right? And more often than not, we've seen people who win those competitions may not go on to become entrepreneurs, or may not go on to engage in research, but the ones who do not really win that but have been part of that process, they also do well. So this is the first question is not where is the budget, right? This is often a starting point, and that is a sure short path to failure. The first question that you must ask is which ecosystems are we already eligible to plug into? So once you've understood the scaffolding, the next question is how do you actually teach risk taking, the pedagogical part of it, right? So moving on to the next slide, the point here is that you cannot teach risk in a system that punishes error. Now, this is the hardest pedagogical issue, and Indian assessment systems often punish error. Now, entrepreneurship, on the other hand, requires intelligent error. Research requires failed attempts, innovation requires trial, feedback, and iteration. And so, if the classroom punishes every wrong turn, students will learn safety and not risk taking. I'll give a small instance. When we select students for our management program, which is very competitive, by the way, we're ranked amongst the top 5 management institutions in the country, and there are roughly 30, 40,000 students vying for some 300 odd seats, right? And so you can understand how competitive it is to get into SPJN. And we are even ranked among higher than some of the IIMs. So, and when we evaluate students, we see that a lot of students come to us who have a gap in their education. They must have done the undergrads, and then there is 3 year gap, a 2 year gap. Great academics, I want to ask them, what is it that you're doing? A lot of them say that I was preparing for UPSC, I was preparing for SSC, I was doing this and doing that. Not that. We do not see as a great thing to pursue, because if you are in that entire chimera of competitive exams, it's not adding any value to us. If you come to our institute, you will not be able to add much value in the class. But on the other hand, we have also had students who have taken a year or two off, or maybe more than that, trying out ventures. Doesn't matter if the venture didn't work out. Obviously, it did work out, or it didn't work out the way they wanted, and that's why they're coming back to school and trying to see if learning management the hard way would help them in the next entrepreneurial venture. That is a plus for us. We go out of our way to ensure that this kind of students get into our classrooms. Ceteris paribus, everything being equal, they have the necessary test scores, they have everything else, personality, attitude, and knowledge, skills, all those things are there. I will, as a faculty with charge of evaluation, or as a group of faculty who do evaluate this kind of students, and we reward this, we would want this kind of people in our classrooms, because they are coming from a position of having tried something which is very relevant to the world of business and then failed. So failure is not something which is seen as at the end of the road, insofar as our evaluation processes are concerned. And that same holds true for in-class learning as well. I follow this practice. I do not penalize students if they fail to name the person who coined a particular framework. The more important part is knowing the framework and knowing where to apply it, because bulk of the work that we do in business schools is case based. So the case based learning is that you take a real life business case, which is typically written in a Harvard Business School has a case center. The Richard Ivey School has a case center. We also have a case center, and we faculties like us write cases on real life business scenarios based on secondary data. Some are primary data cases, that is, they have the access to the company, they know stuff, and they put it on. And then there is a dilemma on the part of the protagonist, or what should the firm do, and stuff like that. And in case-based learning, what is more important is that the student knows, okay, this is a problem of market entry, and this is where the firm has gone wrong, and this is the 2 by 2 metrics I can put it. Doesn't matter if he is not able to put it, or she is not able to put the necessary name to the framework. On the other hand, in schools, what do we teach, or what do we reward? It is not important the person should know the capital of Rwanda. It is okay. I mean, if you do not know the capital of Rwanda, you can always check back and circle back and see that that should not be a judging criteria. What should be a judging criteria is that why is that Rwanda is known in the first place? Does a student know about the Rwandan genocide? Does it know about Kigali and how they changed Rwanda for good? That will be more important for us as educators to know, for students to know and appreciate stuff which is more relevant rather than pure rote learning, which we have unfortunately been rewarding all these years, right? And how can that happen, right? So Indian assessment systems punish error, and my humble request to you or educators should be to devise systems that do not punish error. Punish students who do not willing to learn. That for me is a more grievous error than students who are trying to learn and making mistakes. Making mistakes is fine, and as long as the learning is happening, right? Now there are four practical approaches in which we can embed the risk-taking element amongst our students. First is problem-based learning. So instead of abstract assignments, can we ask our students to work on local problems? Now that happens voluntarily through national service scheme. There are other social service wings in the schools and colleges who do that, but that's again voluntary. We have not yet ingrained that into our curriculum, right? So can we think of assignments where students are working on local problems like water, waste management, traffic, health access, assistive learning, school attendance, employability, local livelihoods? We try and do that in business schools. We have a 2 month social service citizen attachment with the NGO where students work on social problems. And also we have a Bhyuday initiative at SPJMR where we primarily take students who are not from that privileged background and we give them the after school teaching kind of service, and that all the teaching is done by our MBA students who are again from great institutes. Obviously, they'll be better off compared to the kind of teaching education these people like. These are people from extremely underprivileged background with both the parents not being as educated and not having ecosystem in their homes to study. They're from the nearby slums and stuff like that. And you know how the environment is there. Learning environment is there in those kind of places. So we have been trying to do that in a small way. But again, as I said, the MBA is roughly a 20-month degree. In 20 months, there is this as much as you can do. We're trying to do that. But what I would like to see is, similar sort of initiatives happen and get ingrained into the curriculum in the schools and colleges. Second is constraint based challenges. Now, it's very easy to ask students to solve problems with ideal resources. Now, let us cap that resource part. Ask them to solve a problem with rupees 500, a recycled material, public data, or mobile phones, which is already available in their homes. Now, this is very powerful in India because most real innovators do not begin with abundant capital. Third is failure portfolios. Now, this is where the learning part comes in. As I said earlier, failing in your endeavors is absolutely fine. We must build a culture where we appreciate that failure, where we say, "ठीक है, no problem, you tried, you didn't work out. Let's take the learning and move ahead." But how do you document the learning? So students should be able to document what was tried, what was the initial hypothesis or assumption that failed, what evidence was gathered, and what changed. Now, this can be a graded component, not the failure itself, but the quality of learning. So the academic requirement is also fulfilled. So the administrators or the educators are happy. The learning element is also fulfilled. That's what the Montessori training talks about. But Montessori training is all lost by the time the students move into higher secondary and senior secondary, right? So I'm trying to bring that same element back into higher education. Last is hackathons. Now there are a lot of hackathons happening, and they can be used as good practice forums. But hackathons should not be treated as prize competitions. They are rehearsal spaces for disciplined problem solving, as I was talking about earlier. It's not doesn't matter if the team doesn't win. The idea is that to have as many teams as possible who participate in such events. Somewhere down the line, this whole spirit of participation has been lost in this mad race for winning medals, winning prizes, getting, and of course, that gives a lot of PR to the institution, but that's fine. That's all good to have. But the learning element is somewhere undermined in this whole process. Now, that brings me to the core research point that I want to share from my own work, own research work that I've done. So, and one of the metrics that you can try for this four levers is that even 10% of internal marks, if you can allot for documented experimentation, that can change student behavior faster than any circular innovation. We're very good in sending circulars to our teachers, to our students, to the parents. Now, lately with WhatsApp and email, this has become more endemic. But my humble request is again, can we devote some percentage of our assessment for documented experimentation so that we can document the learning? And now with artificial intelligence tools, we can also assess the quality of learning. Whether the documentation itself is on the right track or not, even that can be assessed very easily. And we don't need a subjective assessment of a teacher. It can be done very objectively by artificial intelligence tools. By the basic versions, you don't even need to subscribe to enterprise version. Now, coming to the next slide, this piece is from my own research, which is published in a top tier peer reviewed journal. So this slide is important because it addresses the objection that many institutions quietly carry. We do not have enough resources. So, in my paper published in Wiley Journal, I study how entrepreneurial ventures learn through probabilistic search and bricolage. Now, these are very academic terms. I will not try and explain or define these terms. These are not important. What is important is the idea. The idea is simple but very powerful. Ventures often do not begin with perfect resources, they begin with a problem. Now, that problem triggers search, and then the team recombines what it has. It could be people, it could be networks, it could be tools, it could be local knowledge, it could be available technology, it could be partial solutions, right? So, that is in essence what bricolage is. So, making progress by recombining the means at hand. If you look at the entire YouTube creator economy, most of the ones who are very famous today started with very limited means, right? So when a small teacher in a small college is asking students to solve a problem using limited resources, that teacher is not doing a poor version of innovation pedagogy. They're actually teaching the actual mechanism through which many real ventures innovate. This is how many real ventures innovate. Not everyone starts with capital, right? So resource constraints should not deter innovation. It should rather discipline innovation, right? So ideas, but then again, having said that, the ideas are not enough. Institutions must help students move from idea to validation to prototype to product and adoption. And that sort of I address in my next slide where I talk about why do campus innovation pipelines usually leak, right? Now, many institutions, most campuses do not fail at ideation. They fail after ideation, right? Many institutions collect ideas, they hold competitions, they organize poster sessions, but what happens after that? At the idea stage, the common leak is the students submit ideas but do not receive a timely feedback. The institutional response should be simple. Feedback should be given as early as possible, preferably within 2 weeks. At the validation stage, students often build before speaking to users. We need to reverse that. Before prototyping, ask students to speak to 20 users. That this is a practice that I followed diligently in all my consulting assignments. And these 20 users should not be friends, should not be classmates, should be real users. Then moving on to the prototyping stage, promising work often dies because of very small constants, a few thousand rupees, a lab access, one missing component, or one discouraging signature. So here, even micro grants of 10,000 to 50,000 rupees can matter. And let me tell you, there are enough institutions, there are enough government mechanisms, embedded within our system to ensure that this doesn't become a deterrent. Similarly, at the product stage, students need mentors, incubators, alumni, in some cases legal help, and sometimes customer access. And the adoption stage, the final question is who will use this? A school, a panchayat, a hospital, a small business, a municipal body, an NGO. So the institutional job is not just to ask for ideas, it is to remove the leakages in the pipeline. This also means the role of the teacher changes as the idea matures. Now, moving to the next slide. Now, from teacher to innovation connector. At the ideation stage, the teacher is a provocateur. The teacher frames the problems and asks very sharp questions. At the validation stage, the teacher becomes a coach. Here, your job is to push students to test assumptions, speak to users, and gather evidence. And when I talk about users, I'm not talking about their classmates, their friends, their family. No, it's beyond that. People whom they do not know, right? Because that will also help them deal with rejection and taking feedback. These are two very important skills to have in any career. Doesn't matter whether you go into the business, whether you do become an academic, you go into the field of sports, cinema, doesn't matter. Every field has these two aspects. You should be open to take feedback and do necessary corrections, and you should be able to deal with rejections. No successful person has ever, emerged without dealing with rejections. At the prototyping stage, the teacher becomes a problem solver. The teacher's job is to help students access tools, small grants, labs, and expert help. At the product stage, the teacher becomes a connector. This is very crucial. Teachers do not need to become entrepreneurs. They should know whom to connect with. I'm perfectly aligned with the view that the teachers need not know everything, but they should know who knows the stuff and how do I play that role of acting as a catalyst who bridges this gap. Now, who can review this prototype? Which incubator can help? Which alumnus understands the sector? Which government mission has a grant? Which faculty member at another institution can advise? Now, in resource constraint settings, the teachers' network can be very, very important. It's more important than the institution's budget. Now, let me give one example from the ecosystem. I've been part of the SPJMR. Moving on to the next slide. So, we have something called as a WISE Tech or WISE Innovation Lab, where we essentially have ventures who have incubated elsewhere. They take the support of our ecosystem in terms of our faculty members' expertise and our alumni expertise, and they have a safe space to work. Right? Our institution is not an engineering lab. We do not have the same infrastructure as an IIT Bombay or an IIT Madras. We are not an engineering lab. But the point is, a business school like us can still convince startups, examine the models, connect them to experts, use them for teaching, and convert this ecosystem engagement into research and institutional learning. Now, let me talk about three examples. These are all the finalists of our WISE Innovation Awards, which we do once a year. Now, the Thinkerbell Labs works on assistive learning technology for visually impaired students. Languify AI works on affordable interview practice, and which is very relevant for tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 students. People staying in tier 3 to tier town may not have that access to coaching infrastructure, which some people staying in metros and tier 1 towns have. And this matters for college teachers also because employability is not only a placement department issue, it's a learning design issue. Batex Energies works on critical mineral recovery from end of life EV batteries. For research scholars, this connects sustainability, deep tech, circular economy, and informal sector integration. Now, what is the common thread? Now, these ventures did not win by outspending the problem. They redesigned the system around user insight, available resources, and partnerships. Right. And all of this was supported by a SPJMR enabled ecosystem. And understand one thing, none of this would have been able to scale up unless faculty members were supported and rewarded, right? And all that, most of our faculties are involved in this innovation processes directly or indirectly. So either we take the information from them for further research, or we bring in our research and say, okay, so you see so in Russia this is worked, in Colombia, which is a similar kind of economy as ours, this model has worked. Why don't you try it? Or we help them, we bring in align our PGDM students, our MBA students who are pretty erudite and pretty smart chaps to build certain tools for them, which will help them to grow their businesses, right? There are a lot of things that we've been doing, and this is without having a full setup lab where you have all the resources, all the necessary requirements that you find in a typical large scale innovation lab. Right, moving on to the next slide. A teacher, why would a teacher mentor in the first place? Right? Because today I hear that often from school teachers, from college teachers, my colleagues in other business schools, that teaching has become a very hectic profession. Teachers are expected to do a lot of heavy lifting without being adequately rewarded or recognized for all the work that they have been doing. I agree with that. Right? And my view is that a teacher is not going to mentor innovation twice if it is invisible in appraisal. So this is where the institutions need honesty. This is where I again request the administrators to reward and recognize this aspect. We often expect faculty to mentor student startups, support competitions, guide projects, help with patents, build industry links, and attend faculty development programs. But do we recognize this at work? If a teacher spends 2 years mentoring a student venture and doesn't count in workload or appraisal or promotion or public recognition, why is the teacher going to do that again? Right? The teacher will obviously have second thoughts about doing that thing again. I mean, it's great to talk about Nishkam Karm, but We all have bills to pay. So Nishkam Karm can motivate you to do that once, maybe twice, but again, at some point, the teacher will also get disillusioned. So this is why the role of institutions become very, very important. Now, NISP 2019 is very useful here. It gives higher education institutions a guiding framework for student and faculty startups. It explicitly discusses entrepreneurial agenda, IPR ownership, technology licensing, revenue sharing, and all the stuff. And in enterprises which are established by faculty and students. So the policy permits us to do all this. The problem is adoption. Institutions have to count mentorship hours in workload. They have to find devise a appraisal and recognition mechanism in which innovation outcomes are counted in the appraisal. Startup fieldwork should be counted as research input. It is not done in many institutions. It's very sad, but that is something which should not be left to only for higher research degrees. If an undergrad student is working in startup fieldwork, doing some fieldwork as a part of his startup building process, or is assisting an entrepreneur who is building a startup, that fieldwork should be counted as research input. That is as real as it gets. And this should And also, institutions must support case writing, papers, patents, and consulting inputs. Like I could write that paper because I was granted that amount of freedom and the necessary, time to take leave from the organization, go to the field, speak with the entrepreneurs, collect that information, then the necessary funding to, there is huge tons of data to transcribe that data, then convert it into a paper format, right? I can always do the heavy lifting in terms of the theoretical paradigms and bringing in my intellectual expertise in how to design the paper. But there is a lot of routine work also which goes into building a paper, and that support came from the institution, right? Otherwise, so if you see the institutions which are very highly ranked, or those who have good footprint in terms of research and publications and patents and all these things are concerned, they have built that ecosystem. They have a very strong support system of reward and recognition. And there must be, and in schools, it's very important that we recognize great teachers who are taking students beyond the classroom. So we cannot ask this faculty to be innovative while rewarding only routine compliance, right? And so what is the practical pathway? So moving on to the next slide. So first is, of course, you have to build the teacher. Faculty development cannot be treated as a certificate collection. The Malviya Mission teaching teacher training program, which is been very popular, and SPJMR also does, is part of the institution. The institutions that do it, all the IIMs do it, all the IITs do it. It includes a faculty induction program, short-term programs, and refresher courses. Right? It could be 6 working days, 36 hours, and the different formats are there. For technical institutions, Atal FDPs are very important. That's mandated by ICT, and it is free for participants. It runs for 6 days, and there are also offline Atal FDPs which will happen this year. But the main point is where faculty attend matters. If they attend FDPs at IITs, IIMs, University of Science, some of the good NITs, or premier institutions with strong innovation labs, then that certificate, of course, they're going to get anywhere. Doesn't matter where you attend that FDP. The certificate is not of the main value addition. It is important. I'm not discounting the role of certificate. It's more important from a compliance point of view. What is more pertinent or more relevant for you is the network. If you're going to Indians of Science and attending an FTB, you gives you an opportunity to build that network with those faculties who are at the hub of the startups, which is Bangalore, and who are also directly or indirectly involved with several startups. So they've seen that ecosystem, they know how to make things work, and they also know people. So they give you that connect. So those, and also, if not anything else, those faculty members and the lab leaders can become your sounding boards, right? There are two forms of learning. One is, of course, experiential learning, where you learn from your own experience, learning by doing, and you fail at learning, then you again do certain things. And that's an iterative way of learning. That's one way. There's also vicarious learning. You can learn from others, and this is where that access to network and that ecosystem at premier institutes is important, and you can gain access to the network or that ecosystem by attending FDPs in those institutes. So the main point is, where do faculty attend the FDPs, right? Second, build the vehicle wherever feasible. A not-for-profit incubation structure, including a Section 8 company, if it is possible, can help you receive grants, CSR money. There's a lot of money that companies are willing to spend for CSR in building the next generation of entrepreneurs. So anybody says me that there's a dearth of money, I would beg to differ with that argument. There is a lot of ecosystem support, and it also helps you to ring fence the risk. Or the other option is that you borrow the ecosystem if you cannot build it immediately, and this is more relevant to our audience. So IMK Kozhikode Live is a very good example. It is a IM Kozhikode Department of Science and Technology supported incubator. It was established about a decade ago, and its incubation program is open to any entrepreneur or startup, not only limited to the students of IM Kozhikode, alumni or faculty, right? And all the older IIMs or IITs have a similar kind of ecosystem. And also the bigger institutes in the management and technology space like BITS Pilani, for instance, also have a ecosystem like this, right? So the practical message for smaller institutions is that one memorandum of understanding with this sort of networks is much more realistic than building a new innovation lab. That will take time and that may not materialize immediately. Now, how does this connect to research output, patents, and institutional reputation? That's the part of my next slide. So, startup engagement feeds the faculty and the institutional output loop. Now, this is a very important reframing. Startup engagement is not charity. It is not merely an extracurricular activity. If you can structure it properly, it can create student learning, faculty research, cases, patents, consulting, build scope for executive education and institutional reputation. A student problem or startup can become a field engagement. That field engagement can become a case, like I just gave you an example, a paper, a project, or a patent. And that becomes a part of the faculty CV and the institutional output. It can then feed the institutional indicators, reputation, and better student support. Now, if you look at the NIRF rankings, which is there for undergraduate and postgraduate institutions across domains, it makes the connection very relevant. So research and professional practice carries 30% weightages. Within that, publication is 35%, quality of publication another 35%, and IPR and patents are 15 marks, right? And footprint of projects and professional practice, another 15 marks. So not every startup activity automatically counts, but documented outputs from innovation work can become NIRF relevant through publications, patents, projects, consultancy, executive education, and professional practice. And NIRF is just one example. There is uh, Atal Innovation, ARI Awards, or Atal Research Innovation Awards. So there are other rankings also which reward all of these metrics, all of these parameters. Now coming to the last slide. So what I want is one commitment from each group. We have a group, we have a myriad of people from who practically are from teachers, principals, college faculty, or research. So these are the broad cohort of people that we have with us today. So for school teachers, take up one question driven project per term. It does not need to be expensive. Let students identify a problem, ask questions, test something, and present their learning. For principals, map your entitlements, change one assessment rule this year, send at least two faculty members to strong FDPs, preferably where they return with two named contacts whom they can use as a sounding board or who they can call later for some sort of assistance. For college faculty, mentor one student venture or one local problem as a field site. The output may be a case, a paper, a prototype, a patent, or a community intervention, right? So Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, for example, is a good example, is a good instance of how you can faculty and students of higher education institutions can engage actively with community and engage in solution driven intervention. For research scholars, choose one problem not only because it is publishable, but also because it is useful. So the final line is the line I would leave you with. Infrastructure you can purchase. Policy is government's prerogative, they will announce. But culture is something which is in your hands. You can teach that. And everyone in this room is already in that profession. How do we build a culture of innovation is in our hands. And we as educators, as faculties, as administrators, it is of paramount importance that we understand that and we embed that into our respective ecosystems.
How a PhD student should do a research project is
Okay.
asking you to guide. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure of what your field is, but I think this I can give generic advice, which is field agnostic. First, start with a phenomena, right? For example, like my the starting point of the research paper that I just demonstrated was that how do entrepreneurs work when they do not have resources? That's the starting point. Not all entrepreneurs come from well endowed backgrounds with a lot of resources. So that's a starting point. Now they must be doing something, right? Right. So that so then I looked around in the literature. What does the literature say? Has there been some work that has happened? Just that uh, fact that this question is interesting is not sufficient, right? If it has been researched earlier, I must be able to offer something more incremental and additional beyond what the existing research has already covered. And how to do that? So one of the ways to do that is to rely on Google Scholar. That's a cheap, accessible resource. I'm not directing you to more expensive resources which you may or may not have. The other resources are Scopus and Web of Science, which are paid subscriptions. And there you have to essentially search for those particular terms on which you want to do research. And then that will show up a whole list of articles. And then you can go through the abstract and findings and the conclusion and limitations. These are the three findings. Also, you may just skim through, but what you should must do is look at the abstract and look at what the paper is all about. Essentially, a brief scheming of the paper should be. You should be able to figure out what the paper is all about, whether it is relevant to your area of interest or the question that you're exploring. And then the limitation section is going to tell you what the paper has not done. So that gives you some idea of what you can pursue or what is left to be pursued. And this exercise has to be done iteratively for all the papers that show up on Google Scholar or all these databases that I talked about on relevant German to this topic. And once you've done that, you will have a fair amount of idea. Now, this is an activity where you become better as you practice, right? So practice will make you better in this whole process, and then possibly you will be able to figure out a unique research question which has not been explored. Now, let me give you a caveat. The fact that the research question was explored in Africa and not explored in the context of India is not a very valid ground to pursue that particular question. Context is not a very important criteria unless you can justify otherwise. Research works on the principles of empirical generalization. That is, the findings must be generalized irrespective of context, culture, and background, by and large. Of course, there are always exceptions, but that should be the starting. But just because some research is not done in India, you say that, okay, I'm doing it in the context of India, so my research is a new thing that I'm doing. No, that's not a new thing. You're just adapting whatever was done in some other country to the context of India, right? So that can be a way to look at it. I'll be more than happy to guide you further. You can drop me an email if you need any help. What else can we have feedback?
So we have another question. How can we develop a culture of innovation among middle and secondary school students?
Yes, that was asked by Vanita and Jiva Bharati.
Yes.
Uh, so one of the things that you should do is uh, our science labs, or science practicals have become more of a routine activity that needs to be done rather than for the pure joy of learning. The fact that the sodium, when put into water, that it bursts, that is itself for a high school student can be a very interesting finding. Or what happens to mercury at certain temperature. right? My and also the science exhibitions have become more of an once a year activity. Uh, can we devise a mechanism, or can we develop a curriculum where we, instead of having those usual unit tests, quizzes, okay, they're important, reward for class participation and reward for developing prototypes, developing new stuff. In my school, for example, uh, we had a component. I remember building a periscope, staying awake for 3 nights, building a periscope, seeing whether it really works. And, that used to have a percentage of it. It's not, again, it's till about ninth or 10th class. You are really not mandated. CBSE doesn't put a boundary, CBSE or even for that matter, ICSE or any other board doesn't put a foundation on, how you structure your assessments. Have a end term, have a midterm, that's fine. But can we divide at least 10%, 20%? Let students learn for the sake of, rather than once a year kind of activity, let it be embedded into the curriculum. Reward students for that. If a student is able to build periscope rather than, doesn't know the inventor of periscope, it's fine. It's more important to build a periscope rather than know the inventor of periscope. Right.
And sir, Priya has asked about what about primary students, if you could add.
Primary students are the most innovative ones. They're the most innovative ones. Unfortunately, in our system, um, we try to devise mechanisms to kill that innovation. Right. My, of course, my, uh, I don't know if it is doable, but primary students do not have too much of written examinations. They should not be. Our job is not, they can learning to write and communicate. Of course, they'll do that anyways. But primary education should be more about projects based learning, which is happening to a large extent in the international boards, in the IB and all that. So I think that is a model to going forward. If they can, and again, we should not do the same mistake that the bigger schools are doing. Not involve parents. Parents are treating it their own, as if it is their own thing. You are done with the school. You are done. You don't need to live your life of a kid again. Let the kid live his or her own life. It's perfect. I remember making a project for water cycle, and it collapsed. It just collapsed. Made a plaster of Paris. Fine. That's so what? I was in fourth class or fifth class. I don't think my dad ever helped me, or my mom ever helped. It's not that they could not help me, but I built that on my own. And then when I go enter I was like cribbing. My project collapsed and all. My dad said, "See, when building with plaster of Paris, I was telling you, you didn't put a binding agent." I said, "Okay, yeah, that's something I should have done. Yes, I should have put a binding agent. It rained and some water fell and it collapsed." Where is the learning more important? With the parent doing it or you learning it the hard way? This was in fifth class. This was in 1994, 32 years ago, right?
Yes.
So I think we are getting too much into metrics. We are teachers are part of the race. Parents are anyways part of the race. Please don't bring your primary school students into part of that race. Don't create a culture of competition. Don't pit students against each other. They know they have enough. Their eyes and ears are very open at that stage. They're much more perceptive and much more open to information, whatever they're getting from the outside world, much more, absorptive compared to say higher secondary. Because by the time you reach higher secondary, that entire IIT, JEE, NEET and all that thing starts creeping into your mind. Some whether teachers want it or not, students start viewing each other as competitors, and that's fine. At that age, possibly that can be handled. Not at primary school, right? Much of our emphasis on, insofar as evaluation is concerned, for primary school should be on what they build, not on what they write in the papers. There are many students who just get anxiety, or who are learning disabled, like I was. I used to, gobble up stuff, write numbers, ulta pulta, and all that you do, right?
Yes, yes.
You need to build skills. Yeah. Is
Yes.
there anything else?
Yes. So we have another question from Hemanti. How is it possible to integrate field engagement and research processes with the study of literature at school level?
So all our scientists have been very ardent students of literature. What makes you think that study of science and literature can go in hand? Yeah, I think I learned a lot from M.T. Vasudevan Nayar's writings, right? And I'm not even a Malayali. I read the English translation. I've learned a lot from all the writers. I don't think, in fact, and that's true for my colleagues also. And very rarely have I met a scientist or somebody who is into innovation doesn't read. Literature is, see, science is for the society, for public, for our daily, but literature is for the soul. Both can go hand in hand. But again, it should not be force fed, right? I will not have appreciate say understanding of Mahabharata as much as I would do now. Let's say when I was a kid, because it's a complex text, right? But we have our mechanisms. I would not appreciate, say, the annihilation of caste by B.R. Ambedkar as much as I do now. I would have done it, say, for example, when I was in school. But again, but that both of them can coexist. Even music is very essential. More so, classical music. It's a dying art. Please do as much as you can do in your capacity to let it survive. That helps us. Classical music is directly connected to mathematics. So aesthetics is as important as analytics, right? So your understanding of aesthetics comes from literature and music.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for explaining that. Sir, Sriraj has asked, how can we change students' perception of failure so that they view it as part of learning and research?
Don't penalize failures. As simple as that. See, feedback, insofar as concerned, success should be celebrated in public, failure should be private. Same holds true for feedback. I mean, what knowingly, unknowingly do is uh, more so unknowingly, not I would not say any educator wants to do that knowingly, is we pit students against each other without being aware of the background. Some students might be just blessed with good resources. Some may not be blessed with that kind of resources. A educated parent, a good privileged background, a cousin who has gone to a higher education institution, good higher education institution. Both parents are highly educated. So those kind of privileges some might be born with. The as much as we can deny the caste, class, gender privileges are real. It's much more difficult even today for a woman born in a very rich household to have access to same set of mindset or resources as a male born in the same household. Doesn't matter what the mindset of the parents is or what the mindset of the immediate family members is. Societal views will take time to change. It's changing for the good, right? We have to, as educators, have to acknowledge that. Not all five fingers cannot be equal. It should not be equal. Doesn't matter if somebody is not doing well in school. See, those who are blessed with resources or blessed with a certain kind of intellect will anyways do well. Our job as educators is to take that bottom half of the class and figure out a way that they don't go astray. They don't go in the wrong path, right? The kind of exposure they have to all the wrong things in the society and mass media, we have to, the job for educator is to prevent that. Today, it is not only the teachers or the parents who have influence on them, it is also the mass media, which is completely taken over their mind space, right? So that needs to be taken care of. And if we disconnect ourselves, then they'll not speak to us. They'll rather be happy speaking to a Gemini AI agent or Chat GPT, and that's happening, and that's very, very dangerous, right?
Yes, sir.
But
Yes. So since you said about AI agent, we have a question from not one actually, three questions from Manish Ahuja. Why do many students score well in exams but struggle to apply concepts in real life? That's the first question. Second question is, what skills will remain uniquely human in the AI era? Is the current education system preparing students for jobs that may not exist in 10 years?
Okay, I'll start with the last question. The many educators are worried, including people at our level also. When we started studying, was there any Google, any Microsoft? There was no computer, was too expensive. I got access to computer when I was in seventh class, and I come from a fairly rich background. That's why I could have access to computer at a seventh class. Right? People not from not so privileged backgrounds may not have had that access. But as things stand, even somebody who did not have access to computer at that age is now working with a computer, is possibly working for Microsoft. But most of my batchmates from school and from college or in general are working for companies which did not even exist when we were studying. So we all be fine. Basic of problem solving remains the same, right? Humans, the core to run organizations is to understand humans and solve problems. Understanding humans again comes from how well you have learned in your school, college. That's a process, and schools play a very pivotal role in that because that's where you spend the bulk of your time insofar as learning is concerned. Because once you have become inward looking, it's very difficult in 2 years of say management education to make you outward looking. And when I'm saying inward looking, I'm not saying introvert extrovert. I'm saying inward looking as in you are insular. And now coming to the second question, what skills will remain uniquely the problem solving and human touch, right?
Yes.
AI for
What
all.
skills will remain uniquely human in the AI era?
Yeah, that's what the problem solving.
Yeah.
Problem solving. So again, this is a common sort of thing that is I see this argument often in social media platforms and in general also. Why should I learn trigonometry? Why should I learn this linear equation in one variable or two variable? The point is not that whether you'll use it. I mean, of course, some specialized professions will use it in their daily life. That all the subjects were devised by eminent educationists and ingrained in our curriculum for a reason. The reason being it helps you to recognize patterns and improve your problem solving skills, makes you much more rational, right? And all these skills are very, very important. Everything is built on that. Everything, everything that you study later, be it law, be it management, be it medicine, everything is built on that. Right? If you are not a good problem solver, if your pattern recognition skills are not good, you can always say that, okay, in medical education, you don't need maths. Fine. You may not need maths to qualify that examination or study medicine, but you will not be able to not be a good doctor in so far as diagnosis is concerned because your pattern recognition and problem solving skills are not that great. Right? A great doctor will be one who has very good problem recognition, pattern recognition, problem solving skills. And second, of course, the human touch, which no AI can teach you. This is something. Then she has also asked, why do many students score well in exams but struggle to apply concepts in real life? Because they are learning not for the joy of learning, but for scoring marks. And we as educators are responsible for that. In business schools, that doesn't happen. Nobody, it doesn't really matter who scores how much. I mean, topper gets a medal, that's it.